Hi everyone. So next talk is about monitoring AWS and Azure. So I'm gonna let me see if this works. Okay. So a very basic agenda. I'm going to briefly introduce myself. No, I promise to keep it short and boring. Anyway, why monitor anything? What to monitor? How do we do it for Azure and AWS? And then some options on integrating AWS and Azure logs into SIEM solutions and potentially MSSPs. So my name is Alfredo Reino. As you can tell from my accent, I'm Spanish, although I live here in the UK. And been working in information security and IT security for a few years now. That's my Twitter name and email address in case you have anything to say to me. I work as a security architect, although in the past I've done many different things. I've been an incident responder, I've done forensics. I was briefly a pen tester for a few months, but I didn't really like it. I was too slow at it. So I thought it would be better if the really intelligent people did it instead. So, but these days I'm doing mostly security architecture and advisory. So why monitor anything? I mean, if you have a security background, it's probably a stupid question to ask. I mean, why monitor anything? Of course, you need to monitor everything. You need to be able to detect attacks or incidents or threats in a reactive way, potentially even in a proactive way if you have the free time to do it, and you have the skill set and the tool set to do proactive threat hunting. If you want to do any kind of incident response or forensics, obviously you need to have some proper monitoring, ideally some logs and plus other information. Related to the proactive threat hunting, anything related to data mining, anomaly detection, building baselines, and detecting deviations from it, you need historical data, and I mean it can come in different forms, but logs are usually a part of it, especially when we're talking about performance metrics like throughputs or CPU usage and things like that. Everyone at some point in their professional lives needs to do reporting and contribute to dashboards. If you don't, you're in a good place. Don't change your job. Reporting to management, for example, on I don't know, activity, incidents, performance, etc. It usually requires having some kind of log monitoring. Of course, there is policy and regulatory requirements. For example, if you're subject to PCI, then obviously you need to not only to monitor things, but you also have to look at the things you're monitoring, which is it's one of the requirements. And of course, anything related to even non-security related activities such as root cause analysis and troubleshooting of any application or system helps. So. But the thing is, there are many reasons to monitor, to do log monitoring, but not for every reason you need the same kind of detail. You need the same kind of logs. For example, if your only concern is regulatory requirements, you probably should. If it's the only thing, you should probably stick to whatever they're asking of you, and not try to go beyond that. But of course, if you're serious about threat detection, whether it's reactive or proactive and doing incident response, then you need obviously a bit more. So what to monitor? Ideally, everything and anything. Not everything is able to be monitored. Monitoring everything might be expensive, depending on the size of the infrastructure or the applications you're monitoring. It might be expensive due to storage requirements. Some logs, I mean, it's technically possible to get logs for certain things, but maybe you cannot make sense of it, or they're not really useful, or nobody knows what it means. And of course, you need to have the ability to use them. You need to have the tools or the skills or the time and the motivation to use those logs for whatever reason. So the idea is to come up with a list of priorities and say, okay, if we want to have threat detection, what's the minimum log set we need, and go for it, and then maybe do it in stages, and eventually get to the point where you are monitoring everything you need. When we're talking about threat detection, whether it's proactive or reactive, I find it useful to look at the kill chain models. This one is from DevSecCon. There are many different ones, and they all look similar. I like this one because it's a bit more granular than the rest I've seen, and you can actually model it depending on the threat type, whether it's a commodity threat or APT or whatever. Just a disclaimer, I used to work with SecureWorks in the past, but that doesn't mean I'm favoring this kill chain model because of that. So it's important to have this model or a similar model in mind when deciding what to log, because for every step, I mean, not for every, you cannot really monitor for every step. There are things like the adversary is creating an exploit after doing recon about before trying to infect you or trying to infiltrate you. That part is outside your state, outside your scope, and you cannot do anything about it. But for most things happening inside your perimeter, you can do something about it. And if you know the usual ways that adversaries act for every step of the kill chain, you can make a list of what's a good log to have, what's a good tool to monitor, to be able to get information for that step of the kill chain. So it's a nice way of structuring your priorities when deciding or creating a logging plan. So simplifying the kill chain, we have recon, delivery, exploitation, installation, actions on target. This is just a collapsed version of the one in the previous slide. And then this is the generic one. This is not specific to cloud services or PaaS or ES or Azure or AWS or whatever. This is just a generic one. And these are the typical things you look at. I mean, for example, for delivery, usual vectors are inbound email, web browsing, removable media, and people with credentials, or people exploiting a vulnerability in internet-facing service. However, when we're talking about AWS or Azure or any other cloud infrastructure provider, not everything is relevant. For example, everything to do with user interaction, end user interaction, such as inbound email, web browsing, removable media, doesn't really apply, or doesn't typically apply. So there's a number of things you can monitor, but not everything. So it actually simplifies, in a way, it simplifies the kind of information you need, but you will find that most cloud providers, they don't give you everything else. So there's really a gap on what you can do with it. So also there's the issue of the shared responsibility model for IaaS and PaaS. This is the one on the left is the one from Microsoft. The one on the right is from Amazon. Basically, they take care of part of all the activities or all the aspects of the infrastructure, and you need to take care of everything else. So depending on, if you look at the model on the left, if you look at PaaS or SaaS or IaaS, the level of, the threshold between what you have to take care of and what the provider takes care of, it changes. So typically in IaaS, you need to do more things. You're responsible for more things. In the case of pure SaaS, it's really about user access and identity management and little else you can do. I mean, you cannot do patching, you cannot do monitoring of infrastructure. It's possibly multi-tenant, and there's nothing you can do. And then you need to trust the provider that they're doing the things they say they do. So the amount of things you can log and monitor will depend whether we're talking about IaaS or PaaS, of course. What's good to monitor in cloud environments? Of course, if you have any virtual machines, any IaaS instances or worker roles, you can you should monitor operating system logs, and I mean that's like traditional monitoring. You get the logs from Windows, Linux, or whatever. Anything also coming from web servers, databases, and other application layer software, then you should monitor it too if you can. Performance metrics are maybe not so relevant from a point of view of security, such as things like CPU, memory, throughputs, etc. But if you have it and you have storage for it, you might be able to baseline the activity of your systems, and you can detect deviations that could correspond to denial of service attacks, or someone exfiltrating information from your database, and then suddenly the outgoing network throughput is too high or peaking, and then you need to do something about it. Network traffic, if you can, not always possible. Sometimes you can do it at the interface level or across boundaries, such as a network security group between subnets and things like that. If you can monitor it, then it's really a good source of information. Any other solutions you deploy on Azure or AWS, such as WAF or AV or file integrity monitoring or IDSs, if you're deploying that. I mean, it's tricky to deploy IDSs or IPSs in cloud. But if any security solution you're deploying, of course, you need to get the logs. Anything generated by the vendor or the provider itself, audit management logs, service fabric logs, user access to the management portal, or usage of the APIs or the command line tools or whatever, anything you can get, especially related to authentication, that's usually interesting. And then blob storage or S3 in the case of AWS, access to critical storage buckets is usually very, very useful. Also, the fact that many of the providers seem to log things to blob storage or S3, so you need to be able to get information from there too. So for AWS, there's a number of options we can monitor. There's CloudTrail, there's CloudWatch, there's VPC flow logs, and so on. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but basically, it's the different mechanisms that AWS uses to provide you with activity monitoring. There's not. I mean, if you're familiar with AWS, it's not. They don't have really a unified system of pulling everything into one place. It's a similar thing with other providers. But if you can get CloudTrail and CloudWatch and VPC flow logs, and VPC will flow to CloudWatch, and then possibly you can forward that to S3 storage blob, then that's a good thing. I mean, the idea is, ideally you want everything in one place, so you can pull it from a third-party tool. CloudTrail is as easy as just configuring it and then specifying a S3 bucket to put the logs into it, and then all the logs will automatically start flowing into these files. They end up in the S3 bucket. You can use it directly from there, but that's not very convenient. Normally, you would want to pull those files and ingest them into some SIEM tool or log management tool or whatever. If you look at this is the content of one of the JSON.gz files. This is the kind of information you see. So you can see it's JSON format, and if you want to, maybe you need to convert it to syslog or CEF or whatever your SIEM tool uses, and then either there's a connector or you have to write it yourself using. I mean, a simple Python script can convert this into anything. VPC, it's very useful. Basically, it will give you all the NetFlow information or NetFlow-like information in your virtual private network in AWS, and you just need to configure it. This time, instead of going to CloudTrail, it goes to CloudWatch, so you have to watch it from there. But again, this is easily forwardable to some other place, some S3 bucket, so you can pull it from a SIEM tool. So you can see there you would see any accept and reject network logs that might be useful for troubleshooting or determining an incident or whatever. There's additional tools you can use if you want to. Once you enable all the logs, you can try to put everything in one place, and then having a nice tool, a SIEM tool or a log retention, log management tool, whether on premises or in the cloud, or provided as a service from the vendor itself. I have a list here. That doesn't mean that these are better than others, just the ones I know, the ones I've used. So I'm not really endorsing any of them commercially, but things like Sumo Logic or Splunk for AWS or ELK will typically do the trick, and there's more, of course. For Azure, we're going to go into Azure for a moment, but basically we have the same kind of tools, except I've added one, which is a native tool, which is Azure Log Analytics, which is part of OMS. This is something you can enable on the Azure subscription, and it will automatically start collecting all the information. For Windows and Linux, you need to install an agent on the virtual machines, and then it will start collecting logs and giving you really actionable information on the state or the status of the virtual infrastructure. What other SIEM tools we can use? There are connectors for people like ArcSight, HP ArcSight, or HPE ArcSight, whatever the name is these days. And it's a really flexible tool. You can deploy it in many different ways. This is just one option where you can deploy the connector to the cloud instances or cloud subnets, and then pull all the logs together and send it to the ArcSight ESM on premises. This, of course, means that you need to open a port for inbound connections into the ESM, and maybe this is something against your security architecture principles, maybe. But there's different options. You can put the logger or the ESM in the cloud too, or using VPNs, whatever. I mean, it's very flexible to deploy. QRadar is also one which is very simple to deploy. So if you have QRadar already, there are connectors for example, AWS. You just need to configure the S3 bucket and credentials, and then it will start pulling every log which is stored in this S3 bucket from AWS. Splunk, it's basically the same thing. So if you have Splunk, either Splunk Lite or Splunk Enterprise, you can deploy the Splunk for AWS app and the Splunk add-on for Amazon Web Services. That you would think it's the same thing, but actually you need both. For one of them provides the dashboard and reports and queries and so on, and the other one provides the communication for understanding and collecting and understanding the logs coming from AWS. So basically, the way it works is it collects events from a SQS queue in AWS that subscribes to NSN notification service from AWS config. So the actual configuration in AWS before you can even pull the logs into Splunk is it's a bit involved, but I mean it's something that can be done in a few days if you're careful and don't skip any of the steps and getting the permissions right and everything. So ELK, basically same thing. I mean I've used the one which is offered as a service by logs.io, and basically you just select the kind of technology you use, like you select Azure or AWS or whatever, and then it will give you ways of connecting to S3 buckets or VPC flow and things like that. And same thing for Azure. So it's really once you have it up and running, connecting to the cloud provider to get the logs, it's quite easy. So this is just an example of collecting things from S3. For Azure, we have everything we cover so far. So you can use ArcSight, you can use QRadar, you can use Splunk, you can use ELK. All of them work. There's one nice thing that Microsoft released a few weeks or months ago. I think it's still in public preview, which is the SIEM integrator. So it's really a piece of software. You can download it, install it on a Windows machine. And if you give it credentials, it will connect to the cloud and pull the logs into a folder in JSON format. And then if in the same server or same machine or whatever, you install your SIEM Windows collector agent, then it will pull logs. So basically you deploy, it's called ASLog integrator on a Windows server. You install either Splunk Universal Forwarder or ArcSight Event Collector or QRadar Windows Collect, and it will just pull the logs into a folder, and the SIEM agent will collect those logs and convert it to whatever format it's needed for the SIEM to ingest it. So there is a nice blog post at MSDN describing all the different options and how to configure it for ArcSight, Splunk, and QRadar. I'm sure you can do the same for, once you have the logs in the folder in JSON format, if your SIEM of choice is not supported, it's very easy to create an agent or to create a parser to convert it to whatever you need. It doesn't seem to be very efficient in terms of performance. I've seen that you need 8 cores to get less than 300 events per second. So it depends on the size of your infrastructure, but you might need more than one agent if you're generating lots of logs. So this is basically how it's done. You configure in Azure. You go to the virtual machines, select the diagnostic settings, select the logs you want to export, and the storage account where they go. Then on the server where you install the ASLog integrator and the SIEM agent, then you just provided the credentials. Don't worry about the credentials. That's a cropped image, so that's not the full string. So don't bother taking pictures of it. And then you just tell, in this example, this is a Splunk agent. Just tell him where the folder is with the logs and restart Splunk, and then you start seeing the logs in Splunk. So it takes literally 10 minutes to pull the logs into Splunk once you use the agent. Interesting things to have when you're doing monitoring. Having good IOC threat intel feeds can be very, very, very useful if you're doing incident response and reactive or proactive threat detection, because you can pull the threat intel feed into your SIEM tool, and it will start tagging IPs or host names or hashes or file names or whatever it's there that matches one of the indicators of compromise. And then you can quickly run queries or reports to look for suspicious activity. So if you have one or more intel feeds, then that's a really good thing to have. For increased value, if you're willing to go that extra maturity step, if you maintain your own threat or IOC repository and intel feed, then that's very good, because you can pull different feeds from different sources and add your own, and then share maybe with your peers or other companies or whatever. Sharing threat intelligence is always good. And then lastly, one nice addition to monitoring things in the cloud, especially for virtual machines, obviously not PaaS resources, is having some kind of endpoint activity monitoring. I'm thinking things like Carbon Black, because it's the one I know, but there's different solutions out there which do similar things. Basically, it monitors the operating system for process activities or any process being created, terminated, or spawning child processes, and so on. And for every process, what are they doing? Are they writing to the file system? Are they changing system configuration or registry? Or are they accepting or making network connections? And it will keep the relationship between everything. And then, for example, Carbon Black can do threat intel feed integration, so it will tag anything which matches indicator of compromise. So you can really build, you can go back in time. It's like a flight recorder, a black box from a plane, except everything is in a central place. You don't have to go look for it in the mountains when it crashes. And then you can see the whole process tree at any point in the past, typically for 60 or 90 days or whatever it is. And the nice thing is, I mean, this is a great forensic readiness tool for incident response. It's a must-have, this one or something similar. And then you can use the Carbon Black API or the whatever tool API to integrate or do some kind of manual integration. So you can integrate your log solution with the endpoint activity monitoring solution, so that if you detect something, you have a rule watching for specific logs or events, you can query this tool and say, okay, give me the process tree at that point 2 weeks ago for that endpoint, and flag me any connections to this IP or whatever. So it's great for incident response and threat hunting. And that's all I wanted to say. I think just in time. So hope you liked it.